Elizabeth, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. I was especially excited to hear that we would have a chance to interview you. I was personally very moved by your story, Revolutions in Time. So, again, we're super excited to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself first.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Allie. It's an honor to be here. I am currently a graduate student at the University of Michigan pursuing an MFA in fiction. Previously, I worked as a software engineer, but right now I'm focusing on writing.
Great. And why do you write? What inspires you to write?
I like to use writing as an exploration. I find it easiest to delve into characters and possibilities on the page. So I really like to go through and see what choices people make and why, and what the effects are of those choices.
And how about this story, Revolutions in Time, that appeared in issue 44 of Bellevue Literary Review? What inspired that particular story?
Yeah, that story came to mind when I was still an undergrad in college, and I was living in New York at the time, and the Atlanta shootings had just happened. It was in March 2021, and I was seeing so much on social media and the news about the victims in that shooting. And there were, I believe 6 out of 8 of them were Asian women. And I remember just feeling so distanced from that violent act. And I wanted to explore it more deeply. I was seeing a lot of messages and asks for help from the families of those victims. And I wanted to explore it more closely to those lives and focus more on the aftermath of these violent acts, and sort of personalize and individualize these people who had this terrible thing happen to them.
Well, I'm really looking forward to diving into this story with you. I'm a huge fan of what you've written and how you've written it. Maybe we can start with having you read an excerpt first.
So this story is in 3 parts. Each one is a sort of mini story exploring a family who has lost a loved one in a shooting. And I'll go ahead and read the opening from the first section. My mother looks so beautiful when she hasn't yet birthed me. Despite the spotty glow of the traffic lights, her beauty is noticeable. She is still young and doesn't know postpartum depression, sleepless nights shredded by my wails, white suburban mother's pursed red lips as she picks me up from school in her laundromat clothes. She is so beautiful, refreshing, like cool water in parched summer heat. She is lovely, like dewdrops in early morning light. She is strong, like a waterfall in constant radiance. I lean against the bus stop sign, watching her, waiting, aching. I want to touch her, the cuff of her work sleeve, the 50-cent claw clip clasping her unruly hair, the solid warmth of her middle, hold her there in the middle of the street, never let her go. Amma, I missed you. Amma, it's me, Miriam. I'm here to save you. Amma. It was rainy when she drove to pick me up from church. I had been behaving badly lately, sneaking out at night, drinking at parties, foregoing my homework, and it was showing under my eyes and on my report card. She caught me climbing back in through my window one morning and sentenced me to a month-long grounding and signed me up to volunteer at the Southern Virginia Korean Presbyterian Church fundraiser the following weekend. I was pretty sure she'd promised Moksanim my help anyway, and the punishment was just an easy excuse to force me into it. I was on daycare duty in one of those tiny preschool rooms with bright Noah's Ark animals plastered on the walls, so I wasn't in the gymnasium, which was where it happened. But it hasn't happened yet. It won't happen for 17 more years. Right now, in the beforehand, when I don't exist yet, she's crossing the street to catch the bus home. She's got a satchel that holds her sewing kit and an empty lunchbox. Her clothes are a baggy linen that falls limply on her thin figure, and her hands look 10 years older than the rest of her. 17 years from now, when she walks into the church gymnasium, her face will have deeper lines and her cheeks will be sallow. The bags beneath her eyes will be on the front page of the national newspapers, which will be strewn across our kitchen table, covering half-empty casserole dishes, and the inky print will be smeared with minutes-old tears. But she doesn't know that, not right now. She doesn't know the man following her who spends his nights browsing videos of Asian women with slim feet moaning about daddy. She doesn't know that in 5 years he will be incarcerated for second-degree rape, but that will be too late for her and many other women. She will have a baby, mournfully, hatefully, lovefully. She will sing to the child and worry for the child's safety, and the child will not care. She will hear a thump in the night as the child shimmies through the window, scantily clad and too drunk to know which way is up, and her heart will break in 1,000 ways. She will look for her child at the fundraiser in the church gymnasium and instead find the barrel of a gun and the face of a man who has had a bad day. I'm not supposed to be here in this time, in the beforehand. The child doesn't exist yet. But that man was not supposed to be in the church gymnasium, and this man is not supposed to follow my mother, and why are they allowed to exist?
It's beautiful. It's such a moving opening. Um, and having read the story a number of times, the whole piece is moving. The way you've structured the story, it's so creative. Let's talk a little bit about some of the themes and the structure you created for the story. First of all, why did you structure it the way you did in sort of these three very distinct and different parts?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wrote the first part as actually an assignment for a class I was taking at the time, and it was to kind of mimic a book, the timeline of a book, and structure a story the same way. So I borrowed the structure of They Will Drown in Their Mother's Tears, which is a Swedish translated novel by Johannes Onyuru. And I just found that timeline so amazing in the way that it can interrogate just the past and this yearning to go back and change the past. So that was my first story, and it came out very short, and I felt that there was still more to explore with this story, but I also felt like Miriam's time on the page was at its end. And I think in any sort of situation like this, where you have so many different families, it's important to spotlight just the differences in them and how each family's grief is different in its own way. It's unique. And so I wanted to look at other families as well and kind of portray this multitude and variousness of Asian lives through my story. And that's how this idea to have multiple parts, each one focusing on a different family, came about.
Yeah, it's the story is very rich with a lot of different themes. There's some commonality, there's some differences. Talk to me about some of the themes. Like as I read it, I saw themes around motherhood, religion, poverty, violence, expectations, luck, and I'm sure there's many more in there. Take one of those at least, or a couple of those, and tell us your thoughts and what you were trying to do as you were writing this story.
Yeah. So this was happening at a time when I was really paying attention to violence against Asian bodies. I was living in New York at the time, and it was during an uptick of violent actions on the subway and on the streets of New York in response to COVID. And especially following the shooting in Atlanta, I remember whenever I was talking to my parents on the phone, they live in a very homogeneously white area. So I was also worried for their safety as much as they were concerned about mine. And I just remember every time I was calling them, we would sign off and it'd be like, stay safe out there. So it came from me wanting to interrogate these actions of violence and where they're not where they're coming from, but rather who's on the receiving end of those and what effects those have on these families. And then in terms of motherhood, obviously, because I had so much concern for my own family, I think it was rooted in that and just the level of care that we have for one another. And I was particularly interested in exploring just the mother's side of things. In the story, in the first story, the mother has sort of sacrificed her life in order to raise her daughter. And I wanted to explore these elements of sacrifice. The daughter then in this story chooses to try to save her mother's life and like sacrifice her own. And I really wanted to explore these reciprocalities of love and sacrifice.
What about the writing process for you? What was it like for you to write this story? Did you go through a lot of iterations? Did you use an editor before you even submitted it?
Yeah, I submitted the first sort of mini story in this triad for a workshop that I was taking in college, and I got a lot of good feedback just on clarifying the timeline because it can get very convoluted when you're playing around with time. The other two was mostly my own work. I had sort of these ideas. I wanted to center different family members and different family dynamics for each one. So in the first one, it's a single mother and her daughter. In the second, we have your sort of nuclear family with the mother and father and two daughters, and the father is the one who becomes the victim. In the third one, we have another single mother, but her sister is staying with the mother's son and daughter and sort of serves as a caregiver for them. So I had these sorts of different families mapped out, and I really wanted to play off of their dynamics with one another. And it was a pretty smooth drafting process once I had those sort of juxtaposing characters, but it was a process to get it all on the page.
And what have like how has your writing evolved or changed maybe since writing this, and what was the experience of getting it published in Bellevue Literary Review? Like, how was that for you?
It was one of the best experiences I've had. I worked with Doris Chang, and she was just such a lovely editor. She knew what I was trying to do with the piece, and we had really good conversations about what was on the page and how I wanted it to come across. So it was just a wonderful experience through and through. And to get to have my story published and share it with more people, it was really important to me, especially given the time that I was writing it in and the time that we still find ourselves in now. I find it still very relevant and true.
And so, do you have advice for other writers? A number of the readers at Bellevue Literary Review also includes a lot of writers and aspiring writers. Any words of wisdom that you would share with other writers?
This is a very basic piece of advice, but I do think it's just a matter of getting it on the page. You can always go back and cut things or change them later, but it's really all about getting the words down in the first place in order to try to capture whatever you're going for with your story.
Yeah. What about from a reader perspective? What are the types of things that you like to read?
Yeah, lately I've been really interested in sort of experimental and surrealist fiction. I recently read Ling Ma's Bliss Montage, and that was a real influence for me. With this story, Revolutions in Time, you can see that I'm trying to get a little bit experimental with how time works. Even by the title, we have this theme of going back in time or revisiting moments in time. And Ling Ma has really helped me sort of unlock more of that experimentation with structure and just exploring timelines in different ways.
Yeah, that's great. I think the way you played around with time is certainly very unique in this story. And I also love how you provided a different perspective on the Asian experience in this country. I myself recently published a book also exploring a different Asian perspective as, you know, as an American being in America, and sort of what are things like, what is the experience like in the Asian American community. So as you move forward now with your writing, you said you're completing an MFA. Where do you see yourself going with your writing moving forward, and are you working on anything else at this moment in time?
Yeah, at this moment, I'm working on two big projects. So I'm trying to finish a short story collection on the themes of violence against women and people of color, and just to give this sort of diversity of experience again of Asian American lives. And I'm also working on a sort of surrealist experimental novel about a young professional woman who's getting kind of sucked into a tech giant, but it's a very wonderland sort of world. Things are not the way they seem inside.
Well, great. I look forward to hearing more about that, and I know that Bellevue Literary Review looks forward to hearing more about the things that you're doing in the future as well. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to join us and talk to us a little bit more about your short story, Revolutions in Time, that appears in issue 44 of Bellevue Literary Review. And congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, Allie. And thanks for this conversation. This is great.